In 2019, high in the Tatras on the edge of Poland and Slovakia, 6 cavers undertook a cave expedition in the forbidden area. This was a place they should have never entered, but a desire to explore the unexplored and winning a permit lottery swayed the group's opinion, so they decided to go ahead with the plan to enter it. This is their horrifying story. It's August in the mountains, and a crew of cavers has managed to get their hands on a highly sought-after permit to enter the Wielka Śnieżna cave system. Everyone knew the cave was risky, but the danger was exactly what made it addictive. This place was for the true adrenaline junkies who couldn't get their fix anywhere else. The system is dark. It isn't open to the public for safety reasons, but it pulls in people obsessed with chasing the unknown. Maps exist, but none show the rumored chambers said to hold archaeological or scientific breakthroughs. Its true size and layout remain largely unknown, and over the years, it's taken on the weight of an urban legend. People hear the stories of those who tried and failed, and they think, maybe I'll be the lucky guy who pushes further than anyone else. Plenty have tried, none have come back alive. They were either sealed in the cave or just vanished. For years, Wielka Śnieżna was locked down. No access, no exceptions. If you went in alone, and if you screwed up, nobody was going to come after you. That was the deal. Then something changed. Permits started slipping through loopholes. A lottery, a rubber-stamped form, and the right person looking the other way. Every now and then, someone got lucky. This crew got lucky, and when the permit was in their hands, the mood turned heavy. They sat in a cramped kitchen, gear spread across the floor, arguing like men who already knew the risks. They asked each other why they were even going on this expedition. Some argued it wasn't worth it. Others pushed back, saying if they turned away now, someone else would just claim the discovery. The same fight every ambitious group faces. Fear against glory. Fear was reasonable, but glory had the louder voice. And in the end, glory always wins. They packed the ropes, the carabiners, and all of the food for the expedition. As they prepared, they told themselves the same lie every doomed expedition tells. They were different, smarter, and tougher. The men who never came back just weren't as good as them. It was the lie that carried them straight into the mountain. 2 of them stood out from the start. Marek, who was 36 and broad-shouldered, also very loud, and the guy who turned danger into a punchline. If there was a passage nobody wanted, Marek demanded to be first. Piotr was the opposite. He was younger, smaller in frame, and pretty quiet. The one who always had an out, a plan B, a map folded in his pocket, or sketched on his own hand. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady. The guy you prayed was behind you when something went wrong. Together they actually complemented each other pretty well. Marek obsessed over Wielka Śnieżna. He talked about it constantly, studied every detail he could find, and treated the cave like it was a challenge meant only for him and his best friend. But Piotr was different. He hesitated, he doubted, and more than once he thought about backing out. But in the end, he followed Marek's lead. The rest of the group respected them and even leaned on them. But everyone knew Marek and Piotr weren't built like the others. Their limits stretched further. Their ambitions weighed heavily. And in this cave, that difference would matter. 6 of them went in that Thursday evening, August 15th, helmets bobbing as they moved toward the cave opening. They belonged to a prestigious caving club, trained and hardened. The plan was ambitious but simple: connect 2 dead-end sections. If they pulled it off, the cave would open up like a trapdoor into a system so vast and dangerous that it had never been completed. It would also be open to opportunities to receive funding for far more extensive expeditions, which was something they all wanted badly. Everything had to basically go perfect for them to make it back out alive. Even in August, Wielka Śnieżna hovered just above freezing. Piotr noticed first how loud the water was. Summer rains had swollen the underground streams. The sound echoed sharply off the walls. He mentioned it near a pool as they clipped into another rope. Marek clapped him on the shoulder. "You're always worrying. That's why I go first." Conditions like that usually meant one thing: turn back. The permit itself carried a warning. If the cave shifted under rainwater, rescue was off the table. Too dangerous. But the group had trained too long, planned too hard, and this was likely their only legal shot at Wielka Śnieżna. Turning back never really entered the conversation. Some wanted to, but after debate, they compromised. They'd avoid certain passages, including one of the routes that they dreamed of mapping. Then they split, 4 towards Biała Woda and 2 towards Zemkowa Partia. That fork in the dark decided everything. The descent began like any other, shafts negotiated and water dripping steadily onto their helmets. The deeper they went, the colder the air turned, heavy and damp. Then came the squeeze, the passage no wider than a man's chest, the kind that demanded you exhale completely just to slide forward. Marek didn't flinch, he forced himself in head first. Stone scraping against his helmet so hard it sparked. His shoulders jammed until he twisted. ribs groaning as he wriggled through, stone pressing him from all sides. Nothing to it, his voice booming back, smug and muffled by the rock. Piotr froze at the lip. The gap looked less like a tunnel and more like a stone coffin. He sucked in air, exhaled slow, and then let the cave crush down on him as he pushed in. His ribs flexed against the unwielding walls. His arms pinned tight. Every inch forward was agony. This was extremely painful. That was when the mountain shifted. A vibration, low like thunder, then a grinding roar. The walls convulsed and tons of rocks slammed shut. Dust blasted their headlamps, choking them, and in seconds, Marek and Piotr were gone, swallowed whole behind the wall of the collapse. Back in Biała Woda, the others froze. At first, they told themselves it was nothing. Marek and Piotr were probably just sketching a lead, maybe rigging rope. They'd swagger out with their cocky grin, and Piotr just shaking his head like always. Marek boasting about how they had beaten the mountain again. But that didn't happen. The water kept rising. It was higher each time they checked. The air turned colder and heavier. By late evening, worries spread around all of them, and arguments began. Some insisted that they never should have split the team. Others pointed out that Marek and Piotr had their own gear, but the truth cut quickly. The pulleys, the second drill head, half of the thermal foil, all of it was with the men who had stayed behind. Marek and Piotr were trapped with almost nothing. Silence followed, broken only by dripping water. Every man knew it was true. They had walked away with the tools Marek and Piotr would need most if anything went wrong. And now, the two of them were trapped, freezing, and maybe injured. At 2 in the morning, guilt finally drowned the denial. They pulled back to the staging area. By dawn, their minds were made up. They surfaced, hiked out, and at 5 p.m. on August 17th, they called the TOPR rescue. Within hours, the red jackets of the TOPR were visible on the trail, shoulders hunched under loads of drills, pumps, and coils of rope. These were the men you called when things were already impossible. They knew this wasn't a matter of hours. It was probably going to take days, maybe weeks to get them out. And already, some of them wondered if it was actually worth it. Permits weren't handed out lightly. Everyone in the Tatras knew the rules. Wielka Śnieżna was locked down for a reason. When you got a permit, you accepted the fine print. If things went bad, you were on your own. No rescue. That was the deal. And yet here they were, hauling thousands of pounds of gear up the slope because 2 men had gambled and lost. By nightfall, the meadow outside the cave blazed with floodlights and the buzz of generators drowning out the silence. Inside, the first teams pressed into the collapse. Through hairline cracks, they swore they heard groans and ragged breathing. Some said it was Marek, still defiant. Others said it was Piotr, whispering he was hurt. I actually found recovered footage of the rescuers making contact. You'll hear Marek shouting that he's pinned and Piotr telling him to stay calm. Listen in.
Tam chłopaki już próbują.
The sounds flickered in and out like ghosts. Not clear, but enough to keep people moving. That was the fuel. If they were alive, they had to try. On paper, cavers had survived for days, even weeks, sealed underground. If you had water, a pocket of air, maybe enough warmth, you could hold out. The first pushes were frantic. Men shoved themselves into the choke point as far as their shoulders would go, dragging the rocks until their fingers split and bled. But the collapse was locked tight, every slab pinning the next like natural concrete. One wrong move and the whole ceiling could come down again. By the end of day 1, nothing had shifted. Marek and Piotr were still sealed inside, voices still scratching faintly from the rubble, alive but unreachable. Families arrived at the cordon, wrapped in blankets, eyes wide. They were told scraps. Voices had been heard, rescuers were working non-stop, but nothing else. That night, one of the rescuers pulled Michał aside, away from the others and into the shadow of a tent. His voice was low and unsteady as he told them the truth. The rescue should have never been happening. The cave was never meant for Marek or Piotr, never meant for any of them. The permit rules were clear. If you went in, you accepted that no one would come for you. Yet here they all were, throwing themselves against the mountain. The rescuer pressed a hand to his mouth like he might be sick. He knew Marek well and had been underground with him before. Now he pictured both of them trapped in the dark, ribs crushed by stone, water seeping in, no light and no way out. He admitted he could feel it in his gut, like he was in there with them. The thought made him physically ill. To him, the entire operation felt reckless, as if they were dragging themselves into a graveyard. Michał stood shivering in his damp clothes, silent. There was nothing to say. By day 2, brute force gave way to drills. Explosives were discussed and alternate routes were mapped. Progress was slow. Every vibration was a gamble, but hope flickered. Rescuers still thought they heard Marek cursing and Piotr whispering. The families clung to it. The rescuers clung to it as well, even the ones who had been doubtful from the start. At the center of it all, Mark and Piotr, the two who once laughed at cave deaths, certain it only happened to amateurs, were now stuck in the total black, waiting for someone to get them out. By day 3, Mark and Piotr were still sealed in the mountain, but rescuers still heard noises tapping, groans, and helmets scraping against rock. Inside, progress was brutal. They'd dig a meter and the whole thing would collapse again, the rubble rolling back in place like the mountain was laughing in their face. Every rock locked against the next. Pull the wrong one and you might bury yourself, along with the trapped men. Geologists argued with engineers. Still, new teams continued to drop into the entrances scattered across the mountainside. They pressed helmets to stone, listening for the faint thump of drills. If they could find even one crack, it might be a lifeline. Meanwhile, the mountain brought water. Rains poured over the Tatras, swelling the underground rivers. Wielka Śnieżna was already a wet cave. Now, it was drowning. Streams rose, filling pools, sweeping into every corridor. Pumps were dragged to the entrance, and hoses were shoved down into the shafts. But it was like bailing the ocean with a bucket. On the 4th day, geologists gave a warning that no one wanted to hear. The drilling itself might kill all of them, but still, they pushed. One rescuer told what it felt like. He had been crawling on his stomach, hammering rock in a crawl space barely wider than his shoulders. The ceiling groaned above him, tiny bits of grit raining into his hair. Then the crack of rock shifting, sharp, final. The whole passage squeezed. For one breath, he thought he was done, about to be flattened under the stone. He couldn't even turn around. He just lay there, face in the mud, heart hammering, waiting for his weight to come down. Somehow it held. His crew dragged him out by the ankles, and when he finally staggered back into the floodlights, covered in mud and shaking, he just muttered, "I thought I was like Marek," and then he went back into the cave. That was the rhythm. Men came out soaked, shaking so hard they couldn't grip their helmets. And new crews went straight in. Nobody quit. The frustration thickened. Even when progress was made, fresh collapses erased it. It was like the cave rebuilt its walls as fast as rescuers tore them down. One firefighter stumbled out after hours, wedged in a crawlway, eyes red, voice flat. "We're digging graves, not tunnels." But no one repeated that line near their families. By the end of the first week, hope was thinning. Hundreds of rescuers, loads of gear, and millions of dollars spent. And still, nothing. Just 2 men buried somewhere in the dark. Across Poland, the whole country was watching. News bulletins ran daily. Reporters stood in the rain outside the cave, their voices solemn. Social media exploded with prayers, anger, and speculation. Wielka Śnieżna wasn't just a cave anymore, it was a national obsession. By day 10, they were still clawing at the same wall of rock, one stone at a time, chisels ringing in the dark. Hours of work, and then the whole thing caved again. Rubble slamming down like the mountain had reset itself. Dust scorched their throats. Headlamps lit nothing but fresh rock. By day 12, rescuers lay flat in crawlways barely wide enough to move their chests. Water dripped icy on their helmets, pooling at their knees. The area was so tight, some vomited from the strain. Others had to be dragged out limp, unable to even turn themselves around. One firefighter later told how he thought he was going to die down there. He was hammering at a crack when the rock above shifted. A boulder the size of a car ground down inches from his head, pinning his drill. He froze, cheek pressed into the mud, waiting for the crush. For 1 second, he swore he could feel Marek's laugh in his ear. Then the stone held. They freed him, and he was shaking so badly he couldn't speak. He walked straight back into line, and that's how it went. No one said no. They just kept going. By then, the rescuers were hollow-eyed and totally burnt out. Many of the rescuers were cavers themselves. They knew what it was like to trust the rock, to crawl into dark holes, and to pray it didn't move. On day 16, engineers sank a fresh borehole straight at the collapse. The drill hissed through the stone all night. When it finally broke, they lowered a probe camera. The disappointment hit like a punch to the chest. Some cursed, some cried. After a few minutes, they picked up their tools and went back. 16 days in freezing dark with water and bad air. Survival was almost impossible for the 2 trapped men, but the rescuers kept going. By day 17, the rescuers were running on basically nothing. Most of them hadn't seen their own families in weeks. The operation had whittled down to one final chance. Dozens of boreholes already drilled, cameras lowered, and microphones pressed against the stone, all swallowed by silence. Now came the last biggest borehole, drilled straight toward the section most likely to hold a void. Everyone knew if this failed, it wasn't a rescue anymore, it was a recovery. That night, the drill howled through the limestone, rattling tents, shaking plates off tables. Families huddled under blankets, reporters stared into the floodlit fog. By dawn, the drill finally broke through, and the ridge went quiet. In the command tent, people pressed shoulder to shoulder around the monitor. The probe camera sank into the borehole. It was a black screen. Seconds dragged. Then, a boot. Gasp cut through the silence. The image steadied. A body, half buried in rubble. It was Marek. The loud one, the fearless one, the man who swore the cave would never beat him, now pinned, silent, and beaten. The probe lowered again, and another figure appeared. The careful one, the planner, the man who never trusted a nut until he checked it twice. Caught besides Marek, sealed into the same wall of stone, was Piotr. The rescuers didn't stop. The mission shifted from rescue to recovery, but the urgency stayed. Hours of dangerous crawling, collapses threatening them at every step, until finally, Marek and Piotr were carried out. Their bodies were slid into waiting ambulances. Engines started, and taillights faded down the narrow road. Investigators later said that it all happened too fast. The rockfall, flood surge, and the quarter sealed in minutes. No skill, experience, or meaninglessness would help once the cave decided to close in on top of you. But here's the twist most people don't know. Marek and Piotr weren't just victims. Their expedition proved something that no one had confirmed before. Wielka Śnieżna really did connect further than maps showed. Their last push, the one that trapped them, also unlocked new routes that further explorers later verified. The cave had given them exactly what they wanted, a discovery, a place in history, only it demanded their lives in return. And so Marek and Piotr got what they came for, not survival, not glory they could enjoy, but something colder, their names written into the stone itself, sealed in a place few will ever dare to follow. And with that being said, I just want to thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please give it a quick like and a sub, it really goes a long way. There are more episodes in the works, and I hope to see you at the next one.